The UK has suspended trade negotiations with Israel and summoned its ambassador over the ongoing aid blockade of Gaza. The Israeli government has hit back, accusing the UK of an anti-Israel obsession and saying that external pressure will not divert Israel from its path in defending its existence and security against enemies who seek its destruction. But even last week, President Trump gave Israel the cold shoulder on his Middle East tour. Let's go live now to our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, who's in Tel Aviv. Lindsay, over to you.
Matt, this could just be the week when Israel's allies say enough. We've had the EU, Canada, Britain all moving against Israel in the last few days. Now, today's announcement by the EU that it was going to review its trade agreement because of human rights grounds, that's significant. The EU is Israel's biggest trading partner. Now, many people might say, why now? Hasn't there been enough violence? Hasn't there been enough killing in Gaza for them to have said something before? Well, I think that since October 2023, at that point, Israel's allies felt they had to stand with Israel because of the Hamas attacks. They didn't necessarily like the tactics used, but they felt that they couldn't really do anything to stop Israel because it was, they felt, in some ways justified. But now, Israel has sent another 5 divisions back into Gaza for no apparent military reason other than to cut up the strip so that the civilians are in different places, and basically there is no hope of any kind of Palestinian government at all. And I think that Israel's allies at this point feel that they cannot stand by as more and more Gazans run the risk of starvation because not enough aid is getting in. They cannot, they feel, stand here as more Gazan children are killed by bombs, bullets and hunger. Last night, Israel attacked a school in Gaza City where people were sheltering, killing, according to eyewitnesses, at least 8 children.
Civilian children, civilian youth and women. What have we done to deserve this? Is it the fault of children or the women we found on the stairs with their hair and clothes torn and burned?
At last, the cries of grieving women in Gaza are being heard in capitals across the world. Today, even those who like to call themselves friends of Israel are speaking out. Britain has paused free trade talks with Israel, summoned its ambassador and announced further sanctions against extremist West Bank settlers.
First, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something about the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend we coordinated a response with our allies, as set out in my statement with President Macron and Prime Minister Carney last night. And I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are now entering a dark new phase in this conflict. Netanyahu's government is planning to drive Gazans from their homes into a corner of the strip to the south and permit them a fraction of the aid that they need. Yesterday, Minister Smodrick even spoke of Israeli forces cleansing Gaza. We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous. It is repellent. It is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
In Qatar, negotiations between Hamas and Israel have made no progress, and the Qataris are blaming Israel for instability across the region.
Basically, we have seen that the continuation of this campaign and this way and this behavior, and it's not only in Gaza, but Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, is something becoming unbearable.
5 Israeli divisions have moved back into Gaza, but even the Trump administration is asking questions. They negotiated the release of the only remaining US hostage without even informing Israel. His parents say the Israeli government could get the remaining Israeli hostages out too, if they really wanted.
It was a politics for President Trump. He knew exactly what needs to be done just to press this stop button, and the same message to the Israeli government: rise above politics, prioritize human life, go back to the bargaining table immediately, and pass it over the finish line.
In Gaza, people are desperate for food. Israel is still only allowing a few truckloads of aid to cross into the Strip, nowhere near enough. Yet today, the Israeli foreign minister, addressing the World Jewish Congress, rejected all criticism.
What I want to tell to every country, mainly those who had colonial past, this is a proud nation, an independent nation, fighting on its existence, and we will not get any dictates from outside with regard to our national security. This should be very understood.
Today, like yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu appeared in a Tel Aviv courtroom for his corruption trial. Many here believe he's prolonging the war to satisfy the far right in his coalition and stop his government from collapsing. In Gaza in recent days, people have been marching against Hamas, which many also blame for the suffering they're enduring. The Palestinians of Gaza, now seemingly backed by some of Israel's allies, need this conflict to come to an end. Because if not now, when? Well, for Prime Minister Netanyahu, the most important thing is his relationship with President Donald Trump. And you know, it's not going that smoothly. President Trump, although he has a very similar outlook to Prime Minister Netanyahu, has said he wants this conflict to come to an end. So he's been clear, he does not support this conflict continuing in the way that Israel is continuing it. But then there are other issues as well. He has now decided to negotiate with Iran over its nuclear program, and Iranian and American delegations have already been talking in Oman. Now, Netanyahu is totally against that. If he wants anything with Iran, he wants to bomb their nuclear program. And then there's the issue of the Houthis in Yemen. President Trump has done a deal with the Houthis so that they stop attacking shipping in the Red Sea. But the Houthis and the Israelis are still at war. So you can see all of these ways in which President Trump, who had, of course, this big trip to the Gulf countries last week, is trying to be the big peacemaker here. And that does not fit in with Prime Minister Netanyahu pushing ever further this conflict in Gaza. So he finds himself really in a very difficult situation, because if he loses the far right and he loses the government, well, you know, that corruption trial becomes ever more important. But if he loses the Americans, President Trump, well, that's his biggest international backer. So Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight is really on the horns of a dilemma.
Lindsay in Tel Aviv, thank you very much indeed. Well, in the last half an hour, I spoke to Rachel Cummings from Save the Children, who spoke to me from Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. I started by asking her, after 11 weeks of blockade, whether the aid that might be arriving today would make any difference.
I mean, it will make a difference to some people, but obviously not enough people. Over 2 million people in Gaza are at risk of famine. And as you said, 11 weeks of no supplies of any kind entering Gaza. During January to March, when there was the ceasefire, there was 600 trucks a day entering Gaza. So although we welcome any humanitarian supplies that enter Gaza, this is not enough, no.
And what impact have you seen on the ground of 11 weeks of no trucks at all?
The situation here is absolutely desperate for children and for their families. You know, there is nothing in the market for people to buy. People are hungry all the time, and mothers and their families are telling us that their children are crying all the time. Their children are hungry all the time, and people are doing all sorts to try and find food, try and find money to keep their children going. It's really, really difficult for them.
Is this starvation?
We have seen an increase in the number of children presenting at our clinics who are malnourished. And across the whole of Gaza, the reports are that children, more and more children are becoming malnourished. This is a population on the brink of famine. It's absolutely extraordinary.
The Israeli government says that the food that was shipped in before the ceasefire was ended by them was used by Hamas for its own purposes, resold by Hamas to the population at extortionate black market prices. Have you seen any evidence of that?
We have very robust monitoring and accountability mechanisms, as does the whole of the humanitarian sector. We've been working in Gaza for decades. We've been responding to this crisis since the start of the war, and we know how to deliver humanitarian services and humanitarian supplies. Now, there's no denying that there was looting of trucks, and people are absolutely desperate to receive any supplies that they can. But I think we are really, really concerned that right now what is important is to ensure that children do not die from hunger, but receive the essential supplies that they need.
Tom Fletcher of the United Nations warned this morning that as many as 14,000 babies could die in the coming 48 hours unless they get the baby food that they so desperately need and that their mothers can't produce because they're also suffering from severe hunger. Is that an accurate figure from your experience?
As I said, we're seeing an increased rate of malnutrition. Of course we are. You know, these children haven't eaten the right composition of food for over 11 weeks because, of course, throughout this whole war, humanitarian supplies have been stop-started into Gaza. So I'm sure that there is evidence and data behind that figure of 14,000. It's an extraordinarily high number, deeply, deeply concerning. But yes, I think there are children on the brink of death because they haven't been able to receive the food that they so much need.
There is something shifting on the international stage. The European Union, the UK government, even the United States are really worried about the situation now. From what you've seen on the ground, do you understand why things are now shifting?
Something has to shift. I say every day it cannot get any worse in Gaza for children, and actually every day it does get worse for children. So something absolutely has to shift. We need a definitive ceasefire. We need supplies to be able to enter into Gaza, and we need our teams to be able to move around and provide children and their families with the services that they need. So I'm desperately hopeful that something will shift now.
I know it's very hard for you to judge because you work for a humanitarian organization, but do you think that what the Israelis are doing, have been doing with this blockade, is to turn starvation or hunger into a weapon of war, as has been alleged?
What I see on the ground is children hungry. The whole of Gaza is hungry and desperately looking for food. Now, the blockade was intentionally blocking food that came into Gaza. This is a man-made crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis, and it is affecting 100% of the population here.
So just finally, to kind of compare it to other crises that you've seen, how severe is this and how different is it?
I think the difference is stark in that, again, it's a man-made crisis affecting absolutely every single person in Gaza, and we have compounding factors of a lack of supplies, a very complex and volatile and kinetic war, ongoing bombardment, constant displacement of children and their families, very, very complex in terms of access and any degree of protection. There is no safe place in Gaza for children.
Rachel Cummings, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Last year, Ireland led the way in recognising a Palestinian state, along with Spain and Norway. Now it is pushing the EU to reconsider its trade agreement with Israel. The EU Foreign Affairs Council has been meeting today to discuss the possibility, and one of the participants there was the Irish Foreign Affairs Minister, Neil Richmond. I spoke to him earlier and began by asking him what had been decided.
So the decision taken by a majority, a clear majority of EU member states, is that the High Representative for Foreign Policy, Kaja Kallas, is now going to undertake a review of Article 2 of the EU-Israel Trade Association. That's to see if there's been any human rights abuses carried out by Israel in recent months. So she's authorised her officials to now undertake that review.
And if the answer to that review is yes, they have, what happens then?
Well, two things could happen, Matt. First and foremost, that'll be a decision taken by the European Council on if there's any further actions need taking or should there be a full reopening. But to be honest, what the more pressing concern of European Union leaders and majority this evening is to really exert very clear pressure on the Israeli government that the status quo is completely unacceptable. Much like the decision taken by the British government today, we need to see an immediate and full reopening of humanitarian corridors. We need to see a ceasefire, and we need to see a de-escalation from the Israeli government. We all absolutely condemn the attacks by Hamas of October 7th. We call for the immediate release of hostages, but the actions of the Israeli government heretofore in Gaza and in the West Bank are simply unacceptable.
Okay, October the 7th was about 19 months ago. In the immediate aftermath of that, we saw heavy bombardment of Gaza, which included mass civilian casualties. Why is it taking you so long to reach this decision?
The Irish government has been absolutely consistent in our calls since October 7th, calling for restraint, condemning the targeting of civilian infrastructure, and indeed using humanitarian objects like food as weapons for war. Trying to get agreement, majority or otherwise, at the European Union obviously takes a little bit of a different approach. What we're seeing in Gaza at the moment is essentially a representation of hell on earth.
The Irish government, together with the Spanish government, was early in recognizing the state of Palestine. But many other European Union members have not done so yet. And of course, the United Kingdom hasn't done so either. Do you now call on them to do the same?
Of course. We've been saying it consistently that one of the main drivers by why the Irish government, with our Spanish and indeed Norwegian friends, recognised the state of Palestine last year, is we also want to give hope to the remaining clear international policy to achieve a two-state solution. We will see a conference next month hosted in New York, coordinated by the French and Saudi Arabian governments, aiming to preserve that ambition of a two-state solution. Ireland has recognised Palestine officially as a state. I know a number of other EU member states are moving in that direction. They have certain concerns. We encourage them to move swiftly. What did the UN say today? There could be 14,000 dead babies in Gaza in the next 48 hours.
And you believe those numbers?
Of course, we've no reason to doubt the United Nations. Regardless if it's 14,000 or 4,000, it's far too many. We're talking about innocent children. We have no doubt that there have been innocent children, women, civilians, medical infrastructure, educational infrastructure targeted. And we think the decision taken by a clear majority of the European Foreign Affairs Council today will send a very clear message to the Israeli government, and we will ask the High Representative to act to make sure a thorough review is undertaken.
And who are the countries that didn't vote with the majority today?
Well, I'd rather leave them to identify and defend themselves, but there are a number of member states within the European Union who've been consistently at, I suppose, the different end of the spectrum than, say, Ireland and Spain, some for very understandable historical reasons. Well, I think their own the comments of ministers, be they from Hungary or Czechia or Germany or Slovakia or Austria, are all on the public record, and they can make their reasons quite clear. Every government, every global international organization has a responsibility to say what we are seeing is unacceptable. And I have no doubt, Matt, that if people don't speak loudly at the moment, absolutely future generations will look back very, very disappointed in our actions or lack thereof.
Neil Richmond, thank you very much indeed. Now, Fleur Hassan-Naoum is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. I asked her whether Israel was becoming more isolated.
Well, I just think it's ridiculous double standards that everybody, first of all, let's start by condemning Hamas for stealing the aid that was said to be for its people. We had a ceasefire that let in aid that was supposed to last till July. But of course, Hamas comes, steals the aid, then sells it back to innocent people, and then use that money to fund their terrorist activities. So Israel finds itself in a really difficult dilemma. And the dilemma is, how do we keep something going that is in fact keeping the war going because of the aid? Now, today, food trucks went in, and today we've also rearranged a mechanism with the Americans so that innocent civilians and not Hamas can actually get the aid rather than Hamas steal the aid.
Right, but you broke a ceasefire that was brokered by your government, Hamas, and the United States, amongst others. You broke the ceasefire, you imposed a blockade for 11 weeks, and even if some of that aid ends up in the hands of Hamas, or indeed more likely in the hands of gangs that are able to operate with impunity in front of the IDF, the fact is you've not allowed anything to come in, and thousands of people, including thousands of babies, are facing starvation. That is just unacceptable.
Well, first of all, I dispute the fact that it was Israel that broke the ceasefire. The ceasefire was there in order for us to be able to negotiate the hostages coming out. And in the second round of the hostages coming out, Hamas offered nothing that Israel could accept, with a terrible price that no country would pay. So let's start with that. Secondly, it is tragic what's going on in Gaza. But again,
but you're causing
the dilemma.
The tragedy is there because you're allowing it to happen.
No, you see, this is where it's wrong. October 7th was not caused by us. I think you may agree.
Yes. We've all condemned October the 7th.
All right.
The EU has condemned it. But we're now talking about the here and now.
Everybody's condemned it. Everybody's condemned it, but seems to have forgotten about it quite quickly.
I don't think so.
And so I want to go back. Yes, I think so.
No, I don't think they have forgotten about it. What they're wondering is whether in your completely legitimate response to defend yourself, you've gone even further than you went before. I mean, you've got Yair Golan. He's a former deputy chief of staff of the IDF. He has said, killing babies as a hobby, and I'm quoting him, is there's something that a pariah state does. This guy's worried about you becoming a pariah state. Your friends, Israel has many friends in Europe and in the West. They are turning their backs on you because they just think that if they don't do something, they will be accused of complicity. I mean, you have isolated yourself from the people who have protected you in the past, have spoken in favor of you, were appalled by the events of October the 7th. Is that a smart thing to do, let alone a moral one?
Again, the dilemma is this. Do we keep the war going by the fact that Hamas is stealing the aid and using it to fund their terrorist activities because they've got no other money coming in now? But what does a country do? Do they put their interests before the interests of their own citizens in the country? It's a moral dilemma. I'm not saying it's not a moral dilemma.
Is it in your interest? You're getting more and more isolated. You've been talking about this alternative mechanism in recent days. The blockade has gone on for 11 weeks. And even your friend Donald Trump, who was in the Middle East last week, did he feel it necessary to show up in Israel? No, he didn't. He gave you the cold shoulder. So the point is he could have easily popped in, but he didn't. And by the way, he was talking directly to Hamas, directly to the Houthis, directly to the Syrians, directly to Iran. You are becoming isolated, whether you like it or not, even by your best friend, America.
Unfortunately, this is nothing new for us. In 1982, Thatcher also decided to sanction Israel and to postpone all sorts of things because of the Lebanon war. This is the dilemma, and this is the situation we face since 1948. Because the problem of this conflict is not that there isn't a Palestinian state. The problem of this conflict is that there's a Jewish state, and that Islamic fundamentalism rejects that. And the way that we see things is this. Ultimately, we are facing a civilizational clash here. It is Islamic extremism against the liberal forces of the West. And we're on the front lines of that. And the sad thing for me is that none of you are connecting those dots. Because if you were, you would realize that we're fighting the way that in the 1930s, the Nazis were fighting a civilizational war with the free countries. We're fighting that same war. Is it tragic? Yes. But the tragedy lies in the responsibility.
But the liberal forces of the West, as you call them, they're turning against you, aren't they?
Well, maybe they'll wake up and understand what Israel is facing. Or maybe they'll do like the Americans did, contrary to what you're describing. They've come up with a constructive and productive solution to help us through this dilemma.
Fleur Hassanoum, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.